Hello, thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and today I am sharing with you some of my favorite feminist books. And by feminist, I mean books that have just incredible female characters at the forefront that are so nuanced and have so much depth to them, whether they're good or bad women, and then as well as books that just make you feel empowered to be a woman. And I've been wanting to do a video like this for a while which by the way, if you want to just skip ahead to the books, this will be broken up in the timeline down below. But growing up, I had a lot of sexist ideas, whether it was like subconscious or conscious, and even into my early adulthood. And it wasn't until, as I continued to get older, I slowly grew out of some of these ideas. And when I think back to the way I was, specifically like in my late teens, early 20s, there was a time there where when I think back, like, I just feel like so embarrassed and ashamed and like so cringy. But that's what you get when you grow up in like this patriarchal society that makes it seem like men are better and superior. And so of course, even the woman, it gets like brainwashed into them and they start to think it. Again, sometimes it was conscious, sometimes it was subconscious. For example, women comedians, when I saw a woman trying to be funny, I was just like, oh, that's so embarrassing. Like they're trying to be as funny as the men are. Like women just aren't funny. And like they're trying too hard. And so like it's so ridiculous. And I like can't believe some of the things I used to think. And yeah, this might sound so obvious to be saying in 2023, but obviously women are just as good as men and they have the right to live whatever life they want to live. And no one should be boxed into a stereotype thinking this is the way you need to be. And again, I think today's day and age, girls growing up today have so many more like just positive role models in all walks of life, right? And I don't think many girls are being raised like in a box thinking they have to be a certain way. And yet at the same time, I still see, sexism in today's day and age. So it still exists, of course. It's kind of like saying racism doesn't exist. Like it might not be as bad as it used to be, but it still definitely does exist still. So I decided to make this video and share some of my favorite feminist books, like I said. And some of these books, they're also just very personal to me because they just kind of helped open my eyes up more to just how amazing it is to be a woman, right? And society will often make it seem like being a woman is like a weakness. Like when people are like, oh, you run like a girl, or oh, stop being so sensitive, you're such a girl, or calm down, it's just a joke, girls don't have any sense of humor, or like, oh, it's women's sports, no one takes that seriously, and so there's so many things where it seems like women are less than and looked down on. And so yeah, I had some of those ideas where I thought I would stereotype myself, but some of these books just have really helped me break free from that and embrace being a woman and realize how incredible that is. So for starters, this one comes as no surprise. It is Jane Eyre, which of course is just like a classic and it's so iconic and it was ahead of its time with its feminist themes and the robots.
What struck me most when reading Jane Eyre was how the book was so ahead of its time.
If you're talking about feminism, I think you're right.
Yeah, well, feminism, yes, but also the robots.
Which, by the way, even though I'm sharing a Friends clip, I do want to acknowledge that Friends has a lot of problematic aspects to that show, of course. So by sharing that clip, I'm not like condoning every single joke that's ever made on that show, but there are episodes that I find funny. Anyway. But Jane, just that character, she's just so incredible and is such a role model. And I am going to be getting into spoilers for Jane Eyre, but the book is like 150 or 200 years old or something. So we're getting into spoilers with this one. Anyway, there is a moment, she falls in love with Rochester, but then she finds out that he has a wife already. And so he asks her to just live with him like as his mistress. Like they won't be married, but he'll treat her like a wife. It'll be like just as good, right? But even though Jane loves Rochester, which I think his name was Rochester, right? I think I'm getting that right. Even though she loves him, she refuses to live with him as his mistress because she also loves herself and she has her own morals and her own self-worth. And she is not willing to sacrifice her own self-worth just to make Rochester happy and just to make her happy. And she also knows that it will just be a temporary happiness for her. And before long, like living that way is going to wear her down and she is going to lose her confidence and her self-esteem. And also like if Rochester, obviously he loves her, but if he loved her, like true love is selfless, right? And you just want whatever's best for the other person. And if Rochester like loved her in that deep, selfless way, he would not have asked that of her, right? Because someone who really loves you, they're not going to ask you you something impossible, right? Like, they're not going to ask you to lower your standards. They're not going to ask you to sacrifice something that is so important to you. That too, where it's like, he cares more about his own happiness. And that's why he's asking her to just live as his mistress. Whereas if he cared selflessly about her, he wouldn't have asked that of her, you know? Like, if you truly love someone, you wouldn't ask them to compromise who they are, you know, and to sacrifice their self-worth. And Jane often like puts down her own looks and talks about how ugly she is, which does get kind of annoying. Like, it's a bit too much. Like, we get it, you don't think you're attractive. But there is a part where, you know, when they first like are falling in love, Rochester wants to buy her all these new fancy dresses, but she's just like, no, like, don't try to make me be someone I'm not. I like my plain clothing. And if you have a problem with it, then too bad, because that's who I am. And I'm not about to dress a different way just to make you happy. So even though it gets old with her talking about like, oh, I'm too ugly for that, at the same time, I admire that she's like, hey, that's not who I am. And I'm not going to change just because you would rather see me in pretty dresses. Like, too bad, that's not me, and I'm not doing it. And then also later on in the book, there's another man kind of wants her to be something other than she is in order to benefit himself. And again, she's just like, no. Like, she stands up for herself and she knows who she is and who she wants to be. And she's not going to sacrifice that just to appease the men in her life. And this book, again, it's a pretty lengthy book and there's so much to it and there are so many other aspects to it aside from the ones I mentioned. So this is definitely just considered, you know, just a piece of iconic feminist literature for a reason, and I absolutely love it. The plot is amazing and it's a page turner and there's so many like creepy parts too, and it's so atmospheric and so evocative and fantastic imagery as well as just fantastic characters, and it's just so empowering and amazing. So yeah, I highly recommend that book. And even though I got into some light spoilers right there, it's really just scratching the surface because there's just so much to this book and I highly, highly recommend it. And then I want to talk about Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. And I can't talk about this one without getting into heavy spoilers. And I highly recommend this book. So if you want to read it, then you should just skip through my Gone Girl discussion onto the next book. So I will have the timestamps down below, but I will also put the time right here on the screen so you can see when to skip past Gone Girl. But yeah, I highly recommend it. You should definitely read it and then come back and hear what I have to say about it. But this one, I read it in 2021 for the first time, and it was honestly like kind of life-changing in some ways. Like, it's just such a fantastic book on so many levels. And by 2021, I was already in my 30s at that point, so I already, was maturing as far as, my journey in embracing womanhood. But this one really just hammered home just a lot of feminist ideas. And yeah, I think it's just like kind of cathartic as a woman to read about this female character who's getting revenge on a guy who treats her so terribly. And in real life, I don't condone what she does. And even the character of Amy, I was rooting for her for so much of this book. But granted, she does take things too far and she is the villain of the story. And Nick is the lesser of two evils because he's not a murderer the way Amy is, for one. But nonetheless, it's still just very satisfying having just an incredible female villain and a female villain that you can even relate to, right? And to some extent. And I will say, writing women as villains is also part of feminism, right? Because the thought that women, they have a higher moral compass than men, and they're better than men, and it's easier for them to be good. And so they have a higher level of standard where it's like if a woman does something, it's like, oh, I can't believe she did that. But then if a man does it, it's like, oh, men, whatever, boys will be boys and that whole thing. And so that's just so sexist, right? Like, women are flawed human beings too, right? And women, I also get tired of the stereotype of the long-suffering wife who puts up with her husband and stands by his side no matter what. I'm kind of tired of that, and I love reading books about women who put their foot down and they're like, no, I deserve better than this and I'm not putting up with this. And yeah, which that kind of goes along with Nick. He cheats on Amy with a woman who is 20 years old. And the 20-year-old, she's super chill and laid back. And Nick is like, wow, Amy is so high maintenance. And so it's nice to be with someone who's just so chill and laid back. But the reason she's so chill and laid back is because she's 20 years old and is just so young and naive. And honestly, I used to be more of so chill and laid back. But it can only last for so long, right? Because eventually you're like, wait a minute. I need to express my wants and needs. I can't always be putting the wants and needs of others first. And I want to be happy. And yes, it makes me happy to see others happy, but I also want to make sure I'm getting what I need, And so, yeah, like I realize this isn't the way the story goes, but if he had stayed with her, the 20-year-old, eventually she would have grown out of that like laid back vibe and she would have become more high maintenance, quote unquote. And then Nick would have been like, like she's being such a drag, she's being so naggy, whatever. And then he would have cheated on her with someone younger still, and the cycle just continues. Which again, you might be like, well, why does a girl pretend to be so laid back if she's not actually laid back? But honestly, like it goes deeper than that. And it becomes like this habit that is so hard to break out of. And it's also just like ingrained in women to, which Gone Girl has the whole cool girl monologue, right? Where it's like women need to be found attractive by men and they need to be wanted by men. And you need to do whatever you need to do to attain that, including like being the cool girl. And again, like going back to my own, personal history, like I remember when I had jobs and when in my early adulthood, I would laugh along at the sexist jokes and, oh, that's so funny. And Eminem, I listened to Eminem and he has some incredibly misogynistic lyrics. And I was just like, oh, that's so clever. That's so funny. It doesn't bother me. Like, I'm a cool girl. I'm okay with that type of stuff. I have a sense of humor. You can make those jokes and I'll laugh along too. And now, like I said, I'm just like, oh man, that's so embarrassing. And I feel ashamed that I went along with some of the things I did because I should have spoken out and been like, that's not okay. That's not funny. But yeah, anyway, so the cool girl monologue in this book and movie is just so iconic for a reason because I think it really resonated with a lot of women when they read that book. And yeah, this book just has so many layers to it as well. And obviously Amy and Nick are in this toxic relationship. And it goes both ways, right? Because Nick is he has some major flaws too. And all of the men in this book just suck. Nick's father, Desi, the rich guy she goes to, like, they're all just horrible. And so that's why you're rooting for Amy, because you're like, wow, she's surrounded by these horrible men. Like, yeah, like get your revenge and do these horrible manipulative things that also lead to murder ultimately. But anyway, even though I love that book, I'm not like anti-men or anti-marriage or anything like that. I'm just against the stereotypes that we put on the gender roles within a marriage, and also against the stereotypes of like a woman shouldn't be so high maintenance and she needs to be more laid back. And a woman, like I said, like the long-suffering wife who just puts up with whatever her husband puts her through, and vice versa, right? Like I don't think a man should be the long-suffering husband if a wife is being bad to him either. But anyway, you get my point. This is an amazing book. I really want to reread it. And yeah, it was just, even though Amy, again, she is evil, I don't condone what she does, but at the same time, it was just kind of cathartic. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many women love this book. And then The Color Purple. I read this iconic novel for the first time this year, and I have become obsessed because we just have so many incredible characters, both men and women, and just the way they evolve throughout the story, like the woman, each of them like stand up to the aggressive, domineering men in their lives and stand up for themselves. And then it's also about Black people in America. And so you have these women standing up against sexism and misogyny while also standing up against racism too. So even though they stand up for themselves and put these people in their place, at the same time, they give the grace to those in their lives that have done them wrong. They give them the grace to acknowledge that they're capable of change, right? These people who may have hurt them in the past, they're not just writing them off as like, well, like you're done for and I'm never talking to you again. They put boundaries in their life, but then over time, if these people really have changed and have become better, they allow that, right? So yeah, I just love the relationships between all of these characters. And so we have, the woman supporting other women, and we also have like sapphic romance, which was really touching. And then on top of that, the race issues as well. And all of these topics are just covered so well. And it's just such a powerful, beautiful book with just, again, so much nuance. I don't want to overuse that word, but there is so much nuance to this story and so much depth and so many layers. And I just absolutely love it. And then I have one book on here that is written by a man, and that is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. So The Grapes of Wrath has some incredible female characters, and this has like an equal amount of female and male. But this was written in the 1930s by a white man when it wasn't very common to write these like nuanced, to use that word again, these nuanced female characters who just have so much depth and are fleshed out and feel just as real as the men and are dealing with just as many things in their lives as the men are. And yeah, the story arcs to all of these characters are just so well done and so beautiful. And yeah, so I just really loved this book, and I loved the female characters as well as the male. And yeah, Steinbeck could easily have just focused on the men in this story, right? But he didn't. And so we see the full scope of things. And yeah, it's just such a fantastic book, so well written, so beautifully written, and while also being, a piece of history, right? Because it is historical fiction, and Steinbeck spent time with these families, and then he wrote this fictional book based on his real experiences. So yeah, highly, highly recommend this one. And then I wanted to talk about My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. So I actually just read this book, and reading this book is what really spurred me to finally make this video. But My Cousin Rachel is another story about a villainous woman who lives. This was published in 1951, but it takes place, like the timeline is vague, but it takes place at some time in the 1800s-ish, early 1900s. And so the society, the world is just very much a patriarchy. And on top of that, the two men in this book live on an estate that has men only, and women will visit on occasion, but it is just like a boys' club they have going on this estate. And so it is just so much misogyny going on with these two men. And so we have this woman who comes in and manipulates these two men to get what she wants. And a spoiler here, but ultimately we don't know for sure if she, how villainous she was. Was she just manipulating men, or was she manipulating them and killing them? That's the question. And it is up to the reader to decide to what extent she went, But yeah, this one, again, so much depth to it, and there is so much you could get into. And obviously, yeah, it gets into the gender roles of the time. And like I said, this was published in 1951, which again was a very sexist time, but it takes place even further back in time. And yeah, the gender roles that it explores and the gender stereotypes are just so well written and so fascinating and so thought-provoking. And then also, by the way, I want to say, if you like Verity by Colleen Hoover, please, please, please read Rebecca and My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. It seems like Colleen Hoover just ripped off both of those books to write Verity. And I get, authors being inspired by other authors, that's fine and that's good. Rebecca was inspired by Jane Eyre, and so you can see that. But Verity doesn't pay homage to these other two books in a well-written way, and it's just more like she's stealing these ideas and putting them in her poorly written book. So if you like Verity, again, please read Rebecca and My Cousin Rachel. They are similar, what Colleen Hoover was trying to achieve with Verity, Daphne du Maurier successfully achieves with Rebecca and My Cousin Rachel. And if you want books that keep you guessing and keep you talking even after you've finished it and keep the conversation going and wondering, then yeah, Rebecca and My Cousin Rachel do it so much better than Verity and the stupid, idiotic twist they have at the end of that book. Anyway, Colleen Hoover rant over. Time to move on to Big Little Lies, which, speaking of Colleen Hoover, I recently did a video where I compared It Ends With Us with Big Little Lies. I focus on It Starts With Us. Sorry, I focus on It Ends With Us, but I do get into Big Little Lies. So if you want to check that out, I was also on the Ink to Film podcast and we talked about Big Little Lies, so I'll also link to that. But Big Little Lies is a great book, again, about women supporting other women. And we have the three main characters who are friends and support each other and are loyal to each other. But then we also have the other female characters, and there is some, cattiness going on between the women. But ultimately, in the end, when push comes to shove, the women who had been feuding with the main three, they all band together for, the greater good ultimately. And it's such an incredible moment in that book. And the book deals with, some of the drama going on is kind of silly, but also going on as a woman who is in a marriage where it is physically abusive. And so we do have that serious topic going on. And the way Leanne Moriarty talks about, these not so serious issues mixed in with the serious issues, she does such a great job of just bringing it all together in this book. And handling in such a nuanced way. She doesn't just scratch the surface, and she doesn't just make the bad guys bad and the good guys good. She does it with just so much more depth and complication, the way we really are in life, So yeah, I absolutely love this one. I love the female characters in it. And yeah, it's just incredible. And last but not least, I want to talk about Nightbitch by Rachel Yoder. I read this one 2022. And this is a great one because it's one of those books that just made me just feel so proud to be a woman, right? And to realize what a strength that is and what an amazing thing that is. And it does focus on motherhood. And I'm not a mother, but I will say it does kind of annoy me when people talk about motherhood as if that is like the epitome of being a woman, right? And if you have not birthed a child, then you have not experienced the pinnacle of womanhood. And so when moms talk about it in a condescending way like that, obviously I don't like that because I don't have kids. But this book doesn't do it that way. This book does focus on being a mom, but it's also just about being a woman in general. And so again, it's just a very empowering book. It's very symbolic. It gets kind of weird, but I just loved it so much. Again, like I was saying before about how like the negativity about being a woman and different phrases we have, like you run like a girl and all the things like that. This is one of those books where you're just like, wow, like being a woman is an amazing thing and I'm proud of it, And also just how like, again, society wants to put people in a box and be like, this is how you need to be. And if you're a mom, this is how you need to be. And so I love this book too, because it just shows how like you don't need to fit into whatever society thinks you should be or should be doing. So it's a very empowering book and just a very special one to read. So yeah, that wraps it up for my favorite feminist female focused books, books that I think write good female characters and that show the sexism in the world as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and comment down below what some of your favorite feminist books are. And maybe if there's like one book in particular that really clicked for you or like made things change, whether you're a man or a woman. If you're a man who read a book and you were just like, wow, like now I get it, right? That put you in the shoes of a woman in one way or another. Or if you're a woman who read a book that just really changed things for you, or just you felt like it was saying what you've been thinking, but you just didn't know how to say it. So comment down below. And these are just a few books. I could have named so many more. So maybe if I feel like it down the road, maybe I'll do a part 2 to this video. We'll see. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.